All right, so I'm going to demo a total lunar eclipse, and this is what you should have seen if you did the lab correctly in class today. So I have my Earth and I have my moon, and this lamp represents the sun. So here's my Earth, and then over here, completely within the umbra shadow, is my moon. So you can see that it is completely in darkness and no part of it is covered with light, even though it's in the full moon position. So this would be a full moon, and this is my total lunar eclipse. All right, so now that we have modeled a total lunar eclipse, I'm going to draw out what that should look like on your paper. So the first thing we're gonna draw is the sun, and we're gonna label it S for sun. So there's my sun, and here's the solar energy coming off of my sun, and that is headed towards my Earth, which my Earth is over here a little bit. And so we're gonna label this one Earth. And then just out from the Earth, I'm going to put my moon, and I'm gonna do my moon in purple so that it can kind of stand out. And we're gonna label that M for moon. All right, so now the next thing that I need to draw is I need to draw in my shadows. And so for a total lunar eclipse, the moon is entirely within the umbra shadow. So it should look something like this. And you might be able to draw that a lot better than me, but that's my umbra shadow. And this is going to be shaded. So we'll just shade that a little bit there. And it's not perfect, and that's okay. And then outside of that, I have my penumbra shadow, which goes out like this. And so we'll shade that our lighter color. So this is the penumbra shadow. And so this is a total lunar eclipse because the moon is entirely in the umbra shadow. And the last thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to label the different shadow parts. Penumbra. And this darker shadow right here is the umbra. So this is what your diagram should look like for the total lunar eclipse. And if it's not exactly like mine, that's fine. You're probably a much better artist than I am. So the last thing you need to do on this first part is then you need to write 3 sentences describing the total or full lunar eclipse and what's casting the shadow on the moon. So I would do this with saying that the sun, earth, and moon must be perfectly aligned for a total lunar eclipse. The moon must be in the full moon phase, and the moon must reside entirely in the umbra shadow for it to be a total lunar eclipse. So you're gonna write something like that here in this box, 2 to 3 sentences, and then we'll move on to the next part. Okay, so this is a partial lunar eclipse. Here's my Earth. Here's my moon in the full moon position. This would be a partial lunar eclipse. It's partly covered by the shadow from the Earth, the umbra shadow, and it can either be above or it can be below, partially covered by the Earth shadow. All right, now we've seen what a partial lunar eclipse looks like, and so we need to draw that. So the first thing we're gonna do again is draw our sun, and we're gonna label the sun S. So here's our sun, and there's our solar energy coming off the sun, headed towards Earth. Then over here a little bit, we're gonna have our Earth. And there's our Earth, and then a little bit beyond the Earth, we're going to have our moon. So then the next thing I'm gonna do after I draw the Earth is I'm gonna draw the shadows just so I can make sure I get my moon in the right location. So here is my umbral shadow. Now I'm gonna draw my penumbra shadow coming off in both directions. Umbra shadow. And then I have my penumbra shadow, which is the lighter shadow. So there's my penumbra shadow. And then for my moon is going to be drawn, so it's part of the way in the umbra and part of the way in the penumbra. I'm just going to place my moon up here. So you could have your moon here, or you could have your moon down below. Either one is correct. It doesn't matter what you do. But there's my moon. I'm going to position it just a little bit more so it's like half in, half out. And I'm going to label this as moon. So this is a model of the partial lunar eclipse. So the moon is part of the way in the umbra shadow, and so only part of it appears dark. So again, the sun, earth, and moon are aligned. The moon is in the full moon phase, but only part of it is in the umbra shadow. And that umbra shadow, that's Earth's shadow. That's what's casting the shadow on the moon and creating that lunar eclipse.
All right, so here my moon is in a new moon phase. If you were on Earth looking at the moon, you would see that it's completely in darkness. So it's a new moon. Now when the moon passes in front of the Earth, just like this, you can see that it's casting a shadow on the Earth. And you can see that there's a dark center to the shadow. That's what we call the umbra. The umbra, if you were standing on Earth in that dark shadow, you would see a total solar eclipse, which is what would happen when the sky goes completely dark.
All right, now we're going to move on to our total solar eclipse. So again, we have the sun, and so I'm going to draw the sun in. And then I've got my solar rays coming off the sun, my light energy, and it's traveling in all directions, but this is traveling just towards Earth. And then the next thing I'm going to have is actually my moon. So in a solar eclipse, it goes sun, moon, Earth. So I'm going to draw in my moon. There's my moon. And then a little bit further away, but not too far away, I am going to have my Earth. Let's draw the Earth right here. So there's my Earth. All right, now I need to draw in my shadows. So I'm going to have that darker umbra, and that umbra is going to touch the Earth. And where that umbra is touching the Earth, right there, that point is where that total solar eclipse is going to be. And then I'll have my lighter penumbra coming off this way and this way. So there's sort of a rough diagram of what it would look like. And again, I probably should label these shadows. So this is the penumbra. And this is the umbra. And so that is what my diagram should look like for the total eclipse. And that total eclipse, you guys, total solar eclipse is happening just right here. And I'll go ahead and put like a red dot where the total solar eclipse is happening. And that's the only place the total solar eclipse is happening, is where that red dot is. So this would be a model of the total solar eclipse.
This is called an annular solar eclipse. An annular solar eclipse happens when the moon is a little bit further away from Earth. Notice how there's no super dark center like we saw in the last video, where there's no umbra now. Here we can see there's an antumbra. An antumbra is a section on Earth where there are no shadows. So what's happening is on the top there's a shadow, then there's a space where there's no shadow, and then at the bottom there is a shadow. If you were on Earth looking at the moon, you would see just a ring of sun around the moon in the antumbra.
All right, moving on to the diagram for the annular solar eclipse. So with the annular eclipse, remember, the moon is too far away to cast that umbra shadow onto the Earth. So we're still going to have our sun. And we're still going to have our light energy traveling through space. And then we're going to have our moon. So here's our moon. And then a little bit further away, we're going to have our Earth. But this time, our Earth is going to be out here a little bit more. So now when I draw in the shadows to show the annular eclipse, I'm going to have my darker umbra shadow, but it's not going to reach Earth completely. So it's going to be there, and it's just not quite going to reach Earth completely. And then I'll have my lighter penumbra shadows going out. And then this space right here, just beyond the shadow. And let's go ahead and do that in green. That's that antumbra shadow, and so that's going to be where we see the annular eclipse. So again, we have the lighter outer shadow is the penumbra. We have the darker inner shadow is the umbra. And then this green shadow, that is going to be the antumbra. And so this would show the annular eclipse.
Around that dark center, you can see the penumbra. The penumbra is the lighter shadow. If you were on Earth in that lighter shadow, you would see a partial solar eclipse.
Okay, so finally is the partial solar eclipse. And so for a partial solar eclipse, we still have our sun. We're going to label that S. We still have our solar energy traveling through space, those rays of light. We still have the moon, and it's still going to be in the new moon position. So there's our moon in the new moon position, and we still have the Earth. So this time my Earth is going to be not quite perfectly lined up so that we get that partial eclipse. So there's my Earth. And then for my shadows, I'm going to have the darker umbra shadow. So there's my darker umbra shadow. And then I'm going to have my lighter penumbra shadows that come off. Only this time, only part of the Earth is going to be in the penumbra to show that partial eclipse. So only part of the sun is blocked. So again, if I label my shadows, this lighter gray shadow is the penumbra. The darker inner shadow is the umbra. And the Earth is just going to be partially in the penumbra and partially without. So the only type of eclipse you would have is a partial eclipse. And if you were on the Earth that's in the penumbra, you would see the partial eclipse. And if you're on the portion of Earth that's out of the penumbra, you would see no eclipse. It would just be a normal day for you. So make sure that you have all of these drawings in. So you should have the partial solar eclipse, the annular solar eclipse, the total solar eclipse, the partial lunar eclipse, and the total lunar eclipse. And then you should have 2 to 3 sentences written down below explaining each one. And in each diagram, make sure that your shadows are labeled so that you can get all the information and you have this refer back to study. So there's our umbra and there's our penumbra. All right, if you have any questions at all, just let Mr. Merrill and I know, and we will help you the best that we can.